I met Janet at the State Bureau of Intelligence and Research. I was 22. And I was freaking weird then. School always seemed boring to me. So I spent my adolescence growing up in the hacker culture of Northern Virginia. Needless to say, this scene will make you unconventional, to say the least. I never studied computers per se. I just looked at the world differently than normal people. And my unconventional view helped me to see things that most people didn't notice. Which was helpful when I was looking for holes in your security scheme. It wasn't strictly electronic hacking. I actually preferred social engineering, especially when it came to making fake credentials. That's how they caught me. I wasn't hacking. I was sitting in the Deputy Secretary of State's office smoking one of his smuggled Cuban cigarettes. What can I say? The secretary had excellent taste in real cohibas. Nevertheless, I was oblivious to the pungent smoke that swirled beneath the door. I thought it was boyish fun. They considered it a crime. What I liked about INR was that there was nothing I couldn't hack. So they gave me two options: go to jail or go to work for them. So a year later, I became a full-time geek in the current intelligence division of the Principal Assistant Deputy Secretary. I didn't repair them. I hacked them to order. Janet was a financial analyst on the CIS staff. She helped them connect the dots on a particular problem the US had with a French diplomat. I believe the ultimate goal was blackmail. Be that as it may, the project was unmemorable and nothing significant came out of it. The only result of the earthquake was the presence of Janet herself. She was so sexy that every man in CIS, and maybe some women, wanted her. I was a simpleton back then, not that things have changed much. So it never occurred to me to pursue her. But the head of my division treated her to dinner and lunch throughout the project. And it would be a miracle if he didn't fuck her. I didn't belong to the alpha male pack. So I never knew for sure. My relationship with Janet was different. Janet was a financial analyst and was constantly asking me for information. The hacking process often dragged on into the night. And since it never occurred to me that I had a chance, we spent all those hours socializing as colleagues and friends. We both have an overdeveloped sense of humor. So we laughed a lot. And we spent a considerable amount of time together just talking or sharing other everyday things that people who work together do. I didn't realize I was having an affair with her. But I'm a nerd, and what I don't know about the human condition would fill 7 Cs. On the other hand, I knew Janet was a ninja assassin when it came to numbers. And combined with my special skills, we made a deadly team. She asked me if I wanted a drink on the day we finished that man off. I asked, "Didn't Rick invite you somewhere to celebrate?" She looked at him contemptuously and said, "We did it together, just you and me, not that asshole." There was bitterness in her voice. I guessed that the storm in this kettle had finally boiled over. I may be a geek, but I'm not stupid. If the hottest woman in all of Foggy Bottom wants to have a drink with a little old man, I'll be out the door and hoof it down Washington Circle to 1-2 Fish before she can get her coat on. She was drinking dirty martinis. I was drinking beer. She was attracting all sorts of attention from the male population. Most of them wondered what the fuck she was doing with someone like me. I didn't blame them. Janet is gorgeous in her dark Mediterranean way. But it is her eyes that set her apart from other beautiful women. Her eyes are big and round and sexy. But they're ice blue, like the Arctic Sea. The strange contrast of color with that perfectly proportioned swarthy face is mesmerizing. Janet is also very smart. Her MBA is from Stanford and she graduated from their B school when she was only 21. But I'd be lying if I said the first thing I noticed about her was her intelligence. All the attention is drawn to her small curvy body and big boobs. I'm not making excuses. I'm a guy, and the mind is a scary thing to steer a boat. I looked into those creepy pale blue eyes and said, "You want to talk about it?" I don't have intuitive sensitivity, but I just spent 10 60-hour weeks straight talking to this woman. I knew she and my asshole boss were dating, even though he was married. And I assumed they were having problems. She looked at me cheerfully and said, I thought I did 20 minutes ago. But not now, let's talk about something else. How about you and me? I was puzzled. I said, as for you and me. I know. I'm dense. She looked even more amused and said, you're the only guy in this place who hasn't hit on me. What's wrong with you? I didn't say anything. I just stared at her in amazement. I asked, why would I hit on you? She asked, what's the matter? You don't like girls? Or do you have someone sexier than me stashed away somewhere? I said, I have a 2-room apartment in Franconia and a cat. I like girls. They just don't like me. She replied, why not? You're tall and handsome. And you are not an asshole. Which I can't say about most of your gender. And you're a genius at what you do. You're actually very intimidating to people who know how sinister your black arts are. Well, I had serious concerns about her. Women like Janet don't even notice men like me, let alone compliment them. What was she up to? I took a flustered sip and muttered, I've never been successful with women. I think it's a matter of confidence. But I'm also too introspective and totally introverted. Shyness, clumsiness, and awkwardness on the tongue are not the most attractive traits for most girls. She looked at me with her wonderfully intelligent eyes and said, I'm not like most girls. We've been working side by side for 2 months now. I know you're a socially retarded person. But when we're together, just you and me, you're funny, insightful, and very deep. The most important thing is that you have a sense of values, and that's very important to me. I'm tired of fighting off men. Every one of them thinks he can fuck me if he buys me a drink. On the other hand, you're giving me respect and treating me like a peer and a friend. And frankly, I want to find out if it leads to something else, if you're interested. Who wouldn't be interested in the smartest and, one might say, sexiest woman in the entire State Department? Roslyn was much closer than Franconia, so we drove to her place. She may be intellectually advanced, but I also found Janet to be extremely accomplished in the physical aspects of the feminine arts. Can you say sexy animal? Simply put, she loves to fuck. She loves everything about the act. And she channels all her enthusiasm and passion into very creative ways to make us both happy. I'm a relatively reserved guy. But Janet's passions and her fantastic little body could carry off a statue of Rapa Nui. She never gets tired, there's nothing she doesn't try, and she's always up for new adventures. We were married exactly 32 weeks after that conversation. No one thought it would last. But that continued for the next 15 years. Apparently, opposites can attract. Of course, our marriage was not all peace and tranquility. We had our occasional disagreements. And they could get violent. We are both strong-willed and have our own opinions. Especially Janet, who has a Mediterranean temperament. I'm Germanic by birth and therefore prone to quiet brooding, quite like Hamlet without the skull. But she explodes. And when she explodes, she lets me know exactly what she's thinking. However, since she truly loves me, these storms pass quickly. And the ensuing makeup sex is always immensely satisfying. If our life together seemed perfect, that probably explains why it was such a shock to me to learn that things may not be quite as they seem. There may be a grand plan. But no one has seen fit to share it with me. As far as I can tell, life is nothing more than a series of chance encounters that we give meaning to by making choices. If we choose wisely, the good outweighs the bad, usually. But karma is a heartless bitch. And if you choose to live on the edge, you will eventually snap. So, as the old prison saying goes, don't commit a crime if you can't do time. I was living proof of that. One beautiful spring evening I was in Chicago because conventions are big business. Every convention needs speakers. And I was aware of some of the events surrounding America's supposed war on terror. So I get a lot of requests for conversations. Which is why I happen to be behind the bar at Gibson's Steakhouse in Chicago. I've been on a panel at one of these disgusting professional events where none of the reports make the slightest bit of sense. But everyone walks away feeling informed. My topic was Homeland Security, why I sleep like a baby. The meaning of the topic is, don't babies wake up crying and wetting themselves every 2 hours? You know what we're talking about, right? The conference was held at the Thompson Hotel, which is conveniently located in ORD. Therefore, I flew in late in the afternoon. The goal was to get my business done and then fly out early the next day. For my services, I receive a handsome fee. As usual, I headed for the nearest saloon. I hate air travel, so I like to have a beer or 4 on the road to calm my frayed nerves. And I noticed the Gibsons across the street. The place was crowded, but there was one seat at the bar. It was next to one of the varmints I particularly dislike. But it was the only one available. If you've ever been to a high-end bar, you'll recognize this breed. They are still young enough to be special in their own minds. They just haven't had time to lose enough common sense. They are always alpha males, yo. Fit, good-looking. Their style is impeccable and their techniques are foolproof. In high school, they were among the best. In college, they joined the best fraternities. Their degrees came from the most elite institutions. These two looked like the technical support staff of a vendor that was attending the conference. Most companies pay a premium to those who are willing to travel. This usually includes a generous reimbursement of expenses. It's a gypsy life. But if you are young and not attached, it can be fun for a while. Like all other members of the family, these guys were forever on the hunt. Their need for sex had nothing to do with warm and fuzzy bonding. These boys participated in the game only to increase the score. Women were just prey for them. Their casual coitus was like crack cocaine. Each conquest gave them a fantastic high. But they crashed and burned if they didn't keep at it. So they were always on the lookout. I ordered a cold Gamma Ray Pale Ale. I'm into craft beer. It's a weakness. The bartender put 18 ounces of this wonderful liquid in front of me. He also looked absolutely disgusted with my two neighbors. They must have been there a long time. When I sat down at the table, they were just listing the hottest hotties they had encountered in their travels. They were both drunk. So, if I hadn't put in my earplugs, I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. It was an enlightening look at a treehouse. They seemed to organize the candidates by appearance and general degree of sexiness. The most telling thing was that none of them knew names. They just used labels, like redhead from San Francisco with big jugs or Latina from Orlando with big buns. It was like listening to a couple guys talking about animals at the zoo. The guy to my left was telling the guy on the far edge about his latest discovery. He said, "I gave my vote to this girl I met in Atlanta a month ago. I didn't fuck her, but my buddy did, and he said it was the hottest ass he'd ever had, and he should know, because he'd fucked them all. She was about 5'2", but her tits were easily AD. They would have looked huge on a woman 6 inches taller. But on her they were just monstrous." The other guy replied, "Yeah, I like them really big. Can you see her nipples?" Great conversation. And remember, half the bar could hear those two drunken idiots. It was getting so unpleasant that I was considering standing at the window anything but listening to them blow smoke down each other's pants. She was with a guy I knew from high school, and I sat down with them. They had a little romantic dinner. She was very quiet the whole time we were talking. You know how submissive women can be when you give them what they need. They were both giggling lewdly. I almost threw up. My buddy was one of those guys we looked up to in high school. He didn't do anything special in class, but damn it, he was always a hit with all the girls. You know the type, totally dominant. And he liked to demonstrate his power over those he made love to. Some guys would be pissed if you joined them when they're about to have sex. But not this guy. Whit didn't care about that. He knew he had complete control over her. He just wanted me to see what a stud he was. This was accompanied by a lewd giggle at the fact that the guy was a stud. In the universe these two morons inhabited, such praise was on a par with winning a Nobel Prize. The guy next to me continued, "We talked for a while and I noticed she was wearing a ring. I asked if they were married." This elicited raucous laughter on Whit's part. He said Janet was married, but not to me. Suddenly, I was on full alert. My attention was caught by the description of the woman and her name. My wife is petite, with big tits, and her name is Janet. Worse, she was recently in Atlanta with a guy named Whitley Reynolds. He was one of the lawyers she consults for. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Janet is a pretty common name, isn't it? I now depended on every word this jackass said. At this point, another dude interrupted the narrator to ask how much they were selling for. It may not seem like it, but the only thing these two idiots lived for was sex and sales. So asking about their line of work was not unusual. The guy next to me said she wasn't in sales. She's something of an accountant, if you can believe it. It broke my heart. Janet is a consulting tax preparer. She and Reynolds were in Atlanta last month. They spent 4 days there handling the affairs of one of Reynolds' clients. At this time, the clown next to me was telling his friend a detailed description. Turns out his buddy Whit had been trying to fuck her for months. He said that when she finally gave in, she was an absolute beast. The guy on the far side, who was clearly drunker, said, "So, did he give you a taste?" The first guy said, "No way." He said she was totally in love with him. And she was so sexy that he wouldn't even consider sharing her with another man. I told him to call me if he ever got tired of her. Man, she was hot. At that point, I threw a 20 on the bar counter and walked out of the building. Okay, I admit it was an incredible coincidence. Those two assholes were just passing the time in their usual all-consuming, all-excited manner. But things are always 6 degrees apart. And the association of such a strange name as Whit with accountant narrowed the circle of coincidences considerably. So it's possible that I overheard something I shouldn't have. It would be an understatement to say that the next 24 hours were intense. Public speaking is all about stage presence. My profession is a friendly old-timer with deep IC roots, and it has served me well. But it's very hard to convince people that you're just a sociable country gentleman when all you can think about is that your beloved wife might turn out to be a two-faced whore. I've been working with audiences for so long that the actual 50 minutes on stage was the usual mix of laughter and vague information. But I was acting on automatic. I was too upset. The night before, I hadn't bothered to call Janet. I knew it would upset her. When we're apart, we always talk once a day. But I didn't even come close to grasping at my feverish fantasies. And I didn't want to risk giving myself away. There was very little chance that she was the whore. But even that possibility pissed me off beyond all reasonable limits. It was just a casual conversation. Most of the connection was in my own head. And even as I listened to them, I realized that the narrator was exaggerating, as all these teenage types do when talking about the opposite sex. However, until I found out if Janet was the woman in question, the situation had to be up in the air. And I realized I needed a plan. At first I had to play as if our relationship was just puffy clouds, rainbows, and unicorns. If Janet thought I suspected her of anything, it would drive her deep underground. And she's smart enough to bury evidence of any alleged extramarital affairs. So I had to play it cool. I also realized that I was suffering from hot wife syndrome. Every man wants to be with the sexiest woman in the room, the one all the other guys want. But a stunning woman like Janet can capture any man with just one sultry look, which can cause an inordinate amount of insecurity in an average person like me. Your insecurity stems from the fact that you know it is not your irresistible animal magnetism that keeps her attached. She is with you because she chooses to be with you. The problem with choosing is that the world is full of temptations and people can always change their minds. Therefore, it doesn't matter how secure your relationship is. You always know that your happiness depends on your wife's ability to make the right decision. After 15 years of marriage, I truly believed that Janet's character was unquestionable. And that she would choose marriage over betrayal. In fact, in a decade and a half, I have never once seen anything in her behavior that contradicts that assumption. She didn't change her behavior one bit. She was as loving and attentive as ever. There was no hint of guilt or suspicious behavior. So she was either a Zen master of compartmentalization, or she was innocent of the charges. Unfortunately, however, the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was rapidly running away with me. As a result, I felt compelled to get to the truth, if only to preserve my own sanity. It was just crazy. I overheard a casual conversation in a bar 700 miles away from home and immediately came to the conclusion that my wife was stabbing me in the back. But that's where my newfound paranoia led me. My reaction was due to the fact that I had staked my claim to everything in our relationship. Marriage is made up of many different components, not just sex. There is a social bond. The other person is your most trusted friend. Your wife is the only human being who will never sell you out. Of course, trust depends on mutual honesty. And lying is the shortest way to perdition. And then there's the knowledge that the intimacy shared between a man and a woman is exclusive. It is the loss of this exclusivity that will be the rock upon which our marriage will rest. I just didn't want to share Janet's special self with any other man. It wasn't about male ego. I felt that we had a spiritual connection that could not include a third party. If that was the case, then our marriage was not what I understood it to be. I felt we had to be a binary couple or we would have nothing. I felt like I had done everything I could to make her happy. And if I let her down in any way, I was willing to do anything to make things right. But she should have brought her problem to me, not taken it outside the marriage. And if there was discontent, there was no excuse for not sharing it with me. Furthermore, if she inexplicably fell in love as these two cretins claimed, she should have shown respect and told me she was no longer mine, rather than sneaking around behind my back. Of course, the fact that she gave herself to another man said in advance that the deal wasn't going to happen, and I'm sure Janet knew that. The next step was obvious. I needed to paint the whole picture. I got back late morning and took a cab down the GW Parkway from DCA to Georgetown. I knew Janet was at work and wouldn't be home for a while, so I'd have time to lay the groundwork. I am a methodical person and very focused when working on a task. So my first step was to pick all of Mr. Whit Reynolds' low-hanging fruit. I approached the task like any other feat with zero knowledge. I'm a hacker by profession, although in polite company I call myself a pen tester. This is a special set of skills that I have honed since puberty. And I'm paid very well for my abilities. But I also do hacking for personal reasons. This hack was personal. It was actually more of a crusade. First, I did a deep search on the internet. This took a total of 20 minutes and $39, for which I learned more about Mr. Whitley Reynolds than he probably knew about himself. It was mostly the kind of uninteresting garbage that clogs up every person's life, like all the places they've ever lived and the names of all their relatives. The neatly typed report said he was married and had 2 children, a boy of 4 and a girl of 1. He lived in Chevy Chase with a woman named Mary who was clearly his age. They were both 33 years old. He did have a law degree. And he passed the Maryland bar exam on the second try. He has been in private practice for 6 years and prior to that worked for the Baltimore County District Attorney's Office for 3 years. He didn't have a single offensive statement on his record, but that mattered little because he was a lawyer. And lawyers know how to bury complaints. He seemed to specialize in financial management services for select clients. His clients spent a lot of time being charged. Now that was a revelation. But I figured having criminal clients wasn't so inexplicable given the fact that Reynolds was a criminal defense attorney. And that probably explained his need for Janet's services, at least the one she could perform with her MBA certificate. No diploma was required for other services, just her beautiful body. For the last 9 years of our marriage, Janet worked for hire for lawyers. Like me, her abilities could both help people and wreak havoc, depending on which side of the force she was channeling. She could figure out the most intricate fraudulent scheme, and if she wanted to, she could pull it off herself. We both made a lot of money selling our expertise. But there were times when I wondered why we wore the white hat. It was almost impossible to catch either of us. I knew my motivation. I can't deal with guilt. So I'm not going to be a criminal. I assumed Janet was honest for the same reason. But thanks to a recent epiphany, I was beginning to doubt it. Maybe she played better than I thought she would. I thought I knew what my prey looked like. But I really needed to access his computer to attach his ass to my personal mounting board. It was just after lunch, and I harnessed my canine with full armor to do a little dogfighting. Janet adores dogs. She loves them so much that she sometimes brings home stray ones. That's how I got Buster. Buster is big and pot-bellied and he drools a lot. He's also really, really scary looking. So no one wanted to adopt him. I felt sorry for the poor old man. He's my dog now. There is no more gentle, loyal, and loving creature than Buster. But he is so intimidating that at first I thought Janet might have accidentally rescued a mountain lion. I bought Buster a leash and gear. It was a beautiful spring day in Washington and the humidity was only 99%. I planned to go for a walk. Buster was very excited. He knew what we were going to do. To get into Mr. Whitley Reynolds' life, I had to access the dude's system. I could hack into it. But to make the connection, I had to be in close proximity. And most people don't like strangers parking in their driveway while they ping the family router. I could drive by slowly. But if I were on the street, I would have range issues. 802.11 is not super powerful. And a Wi-Fi sniper on the roof of a car would be too obvious. So the closer the better. Since I do it for fun, I've come up with an approach to war diving that allows me to get very up close and personal with my target without anyone finding out. I was able to do this because Buster is only slightly smaller than a Shetland pony. So he can easily walk in a harness with 40 pounds of hacking gear strapped to him. Of course, the casual observer might think I'm one of those aging hippies who harnesses their big dog to carry water and a backpack on walks. I set up a small but very powerful laptop in Buster's bag. It was running NetStumbler and a few other common hacking programs like Wireshark and Brutus. His harness served as the antenna. I also added a few special things I received from a few of my Ukrainian friends. What? Don't you realize that hackers practically invented the internet community? We'd walk down any street, just a boy and his dog, and I could monitor all the home networks until I found the right router. Then I'd press a little button in Buster's leash handle, and my hardware would turn the target SSID into an evil twin. Once I deploy this malicious gem, I will own his network and all of his devices. And I could do the rest of my work via 4G from the comfort of my own home. We drove a half hour to the Whitley neighborhood and both of us went out for a walk. Buster seems to know when we're doing military dogs. He usually pulls like crazy. But when we do military dogs, he walks right by us, sniffing all around us. He even occasionally looks over his shoulder as if to say, "You're getting the boss signal?" Or I should drive slower. Anyone who has a dog knows they talk to you. Buster reminds me of the big black guy from the movie The Green Mile. Anyway, as we pulled up to his house, the device my attack dog was carrying beeped and received Reynolds' router. It took the brute about 30 seconds to hack into their WAP and I got a green light telling me that the evil twin was set up and overrode the home router signal. My twin was now running Reynolds' network. I pressed the button, and the evil twin jumped off the harness. I bent down, picked it up, and tossed it carelessly into the shrubbery in front of the house. When it lies in tall grass or bushes, the casing is almost impossible to detect. We walked nonchalantly back to the car. Our work was done. It was 3 o'clock, and Janet would be home soon. So I pulled out my special laptop. It holds all the stuff I buy on hack sites for bitcoins, not money. No one in their right mind would buy something on a hacker site with their Visa. I confirmed that Reynolds' system is connected to the twin, wide open and awaiting my favors. I didn't need to download anything as it was all available to read. But I dumped their garbage into a file on my computer. Civilians don't realize that their classified material doesn't actually disappear when they hit the delete key. I'll talk about that later. I've also started a mirror record of any system activity that has occurred since then. Just in case someone was smart enough to erase everything. If there was something between Reynolds and Janet, I had hard evidence. I just hadn't found it yet. But that's what I would have done. I also planned to listen to my wife's phone for the short time between when she opened the door and when I kissed her. Then I intended to ransack her computer as soon as she fell asleep. In fact, by tomorrow I should have known everything she knew and more. Because every aspect of her lover's personal life was to be mine. Was it morally bankrupt? Of course. But there were two extenuating circumstances. First of all, I can do it. And secondly, no one will know. It's like the scammer's mantra, you betcha. But I wasn't the kind of person who supposedly fucked around in marriage. And as far as I was concerned, I had to deal with any accusations of vagrancy in front of both of us. For 15 years, Janet came to my house on a regular schedule. Unlike other working women, she never went out drinking with company. I always thought that little trait was a sign of how valuable marriage was to her. So I felt guilty as I scanned her smartphone in the den and installed the Man in the Middle app on it. Then she went around the corner into a den. She is still so gorgeous it takes my breath away. She walked over to where I was sitting at my desk and hugged me. The kiss told me that she really missed me. And it promised that she would show me how much she missed me. She is a beautiful little woman, but it is her inner self that makes her special. Kitten is the best way to express her essence. Even in her 38 years, she is stunningly attractive, perfectly proportioned facial features, vivacious spirit, light-hearted fun, and a deceptive innocence in her eyes. As a couple, she's the sunshine and I'm, well, I don't know exactly what I am. The word nerd comes to mind. Janet's boundless energy and playfulness has always been the perfect counterbalance to my somewhat introverted nature. And we're perfect for each other when we're in public. I never try to steal her attention. And she never wants to stay out of his glare. Janet's ability to banter with others fills in the blanks when we socialize. As a result, most people think she's a big flirt, and I'm too ignorant to notice. I don't mind flirting if I feel that our spiritual bond is strong. And I've never had the slightest reason to doubt it until now. She bought takeout sushi at Kotobuki, set out a couple plates, and sat across from me while she divided the loot. She asked, "How was your trip?" I said, "Instructive." She looked puzzled and asked, "How's that?" I said, "I've learned something that has me working on a new project. This is my top priority, and I will spend all my time on it until I solve this problem." She looked at me brightly, without a hint of guilt or concern, and said, "That's great. I know you always need someone to throw you the ball. Why didn't you call last night?" I looked at her. God, she was hot. I said, "I've been thinking about some things, but I can't tell you anything. I don't want to talk about it until I have dealt with the problem." She replied without showing the least bit of concern, "Well, all in all, it was fine. I worked until almost midnight on whatever I was doing under my contract with Whit Reynolds." It sent a lightning bolt of anger through me. She'd been talking non-stop and hadn't noticed it. She said, "I'm starting to get worried about this whole situation. I think this is my last trip with him. He wants to go to Miami early tomorrow morning for a meeting, and I'm going with him. But there are some things that just don't add up, and I know how to add up because I'm a tax preparer." This was accompanied by a loving smile that lit up the entire room. My heart dropped. I said, trying to keep the hope out of my voice, "Then maybe you shouldn't go." Meanwhile, she was concentrating on dipping a California roll in soy sauce. Did I detect a hint of hesitation? I have a contract with him, and I need this last trip to fulfill all the conditions. So I have to go. But after that, I'm cutting off all contact with him. Was it a coded message that she was going to dump him as a lover? And I'm going to spend all the money I make from this engagement on the trip. I want to connect with you in a way we've never connected before. And I want that connection to be very deep, if you catch my drift. How about a cruise? I continued the charade. I said cheerfully, "We'll see when you get back." I was sure the ship had already sailed. She definitely had something to do. She digested my statement and decided I was being neglectful as usual. We have complicated lives, and a long cruise is something that requires planning. She said, and there was an urgency in her voice, "There's something else. My body has been craving you all day. So, if you don't mind, I want you to do something for me before we go to bed. Was it a little pity sex for the poor ignorant husband? In my opinion, it didn't matter whether it was or not. Perhaps this was my last chance to make love to my only friend and companion. Because tomorrow will definitely be a different day. She's only 5'2". But sometimes it feels like half that height is her slender legs. She rose gracefully and walked to my edge of the table. I stood up. She took my hand and led me without a word toward our bedroom. She's a small woman, but very muscular and round, and the sight of those buns twitching under that expensive alpaca jersey dress and those full, round calves flexing as she walked in 4-inch heels pushed all concerns about her fidelity to the back of my mind. When we reached the bedroom, she turned sharply, wrapped her arms around my neck, and pressed herself against me. It was a feat of gymnastics, considering the fact that I was a full foot taller than she was. She opened her mouth, inviting me to penetrate her inner world. It's more intimate than a kiss. It's like she's completely absorbed in me. She has another trait. I've never heard of such a trait in a woman before. When she kisses me, as she does now, she comes almost immediately. It's the strangest sensation. First you get her absolutely hot mouth, and then she starts breathing incredibly fast through her nose, and you hear whimpers and moans. It's as if the mere intimacy of a kiss brings her to orgasm. I know it's because of the sudden intimacy, not the physical sensations. But it is a sign that she is fully engaged in our lovemaking. It's as if there is no other reality for her than our intimate connection. She broke the kiss and pulled back, panting with desire. Her eyes were so stupefied with lust that they seemed like blue frost balls. The dress fell over her head. Then she literally fell backward onto the bed. As she did so, she raised her legs in the classic feminine pose, legs up, bent at the waist 90 degrees, with her knees drawn together, and removed the black cape she was wearing. Meanwhile, I was wasting no time in clearing the ground for action. Usually we did a lot of foreplay, but that wasn't the case this evening. She wanted him without delay. From where I stood, I could smell her arousal. And as she shed her panties from one outstretched leg, she emphasized her need. She mumbled over and over, "Fuck me, you have to fuck me, you have to give it to me now." Looking at this little Venus with her dark blonde hair and legs fluttering in the air, kneeling together, I was inspired to take 2 steps forward, press her knees to my chest, and throw both of her legs over one shoulder. When I finally came to, she was lying next to me and just staring at the ceiling like she was a million miles away. I suddenly had a terrible thought: is this the last time? Is this the end of my happiness? I've decided I'm being a jerk. Whatever would happen, would happen. But tonight I had her, and that was all that mattered. She turned and looked at me with a mysterious longing in her eyes and said, "I will love you forever. Promise me you'll be mine forever no matter what." I smiled at her piercing sincerity and said, "I promise." But I mentally added, "There are a few sensible conditions in this, my dear. For example, you won't be fucking anyone else." She snuggled under the blanket and said dreamily, "I'm going to sleep now. I'm leaving early to catch my plane. So I won't be here when you wake up. When you do, just remember that this is the last time for me. I'll never leave you again." Then she dozed off. I thought with slight irony that the choice might not be hers. I went downstairs and checked her laptop. I went back upstairs, brushed my teeth and went to bed. I know I acted like a mean son of a bitch. But those were desperate bets. As I fell asleep, I thought, how can she be so wholeheartedly devoted to me and yet give herself to another man? I am no genius when it comes to the human heart. But there was no conceivable set of circumstances under which the woman I knew as my wife could have done something like this. Underscore 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 underscore. I don't care what the romantics say. Convenient habit is the cornerstone of marriage. This is a pragmatic fact. You spend a lifetime together. That's a lot of time to kill. Most of it has to do with doing the humble repetitive activities you do just to get through another day. And constantly interfering with each other is not conducive to marital harmony. That's why a systematic routine is so important. She always showers first and I shave. Then I shower while she gets dressed. And then I get dressed while she makes coffee. This has been the case in the Widger household every weekday since time immemorial. Except for today. Today she was up early and out the door before I even woke up. The empty seat next to me emitted a heartbreaking aroma. I grabbed an energy bar and headed out for my morning run. I have always been a runner. I like to walk 3 to 5 miles almost every day, depending on my mood. As a result, 38 years later, I'm still a greyhound, albeit a very tall one. I'm probably also hooked on my own endorphins. Upon returning, I took a shower. Refreshed, I sat down to see what I could see. There was a lot of junk in Reynolds' home system. The problem is that you never have enough information. The problem is that you have unorganized piles of it. So finding good things is like finding the proverbial needle in a field dotted with haystacks. That's why you must have a talent like mine. First, I did a simple search through Reynolds' deleted emails to find a single one from Janet. What I received was a mere trifle. It contained about 50 messages from the last 3 months, ranging from a message about what he wanted to know about her services to one she sent him yesterday. I put the accumulated messages in a folder and went looking for something else. They had the usual family junk on their hard drive, completely uninteresting except for pictures. He and his wife seemed to have the perfect marriage. They were both attractive people with beautiful children. They even had the obligatory golden retriever. He looked happy, too. The vacation photos capture an average upper-middle-class family doing the usual yuppie things. I wondered what could have motivated a man with such a life to go after another man's wife. Maybe it was just the thrill of the hunt. You spend your bachelor life scoring points and some men just can't grow up. Even after they've committed to marriage. When I snoop through other people's cars, my first target is encrypted material. People don't encrypt things unless they want to keep them secret. So for a hacker, encryption is like blood on the water for a shark. I did a file system search and verified that there was one encrypted folder. It took a physical memory dump to recover the key, but I cracked his virtual safe in 5 hours. I realized with horror that Janet had probably been with the cocksucker while I was deciphering. I set the previously encrypted folder aside next to his messages to Janet. Then I did a simple query of his file system using every keyword I could think of. Nothing else came up. First, I looked at the email. It all started 3 months ago with the usual business inquiries and dating messages. Then the tone changed. Apparently he'd met her at lunch and liked what he saw. She was completely professional in the way she handled the engagement. But he was already starting to lean towards seduction. I couldn't believe she couldn't see it. But then again, Janet has a flippant disregard for men. I suppose if you were like her, you'd be like her, too. The terms of the contract were typical for her. She did the financial work and he interacted with the client. The back and forth messages crossed the line of flirtation somewhere around the 33rd post. Then they quickly devolved into outright incitement on his part. It was long and personal. There was no sexual content, but words like affectionate and close friend began to creep into the conversation. Maybe it hadn't come to a physical relationship yet. But emotionally, they were too close at least, he thought so. Then I finally found it. It was the 44th message in a stack of 50. There was no what or why, it just said, "You made me. What we did has never happened before and will never happen again. I love my husband and I value my marriage too much for that. You caught me off guard. That's the only reason you stepped out of line, I'm so ashamed. I will honor my business obligations. But don't you ever touch me again." The timing coincided with a trip to Atlanta. What followed was exactly what you'd expect from a guy like Reynolds. He was both persuasive and intimidating. On the one hand, he constantly reminded Janet of their close friendship. He even confessed his love for her and that he was willing to leave his wife and children for her. What I liked most was when he told her how great she was fucking and that he had never experienced sex like that before. A smug smirk squeezed unmistakably between the lines. He also noted that they have a contract. She didn't buy the lengthy declarations of love, but she did buy the contract part. He threatened a major lawsuit if she violated the terms of their agreement. And, of course, the reason for the breach of contract would have to come out in court. That means I recognize. 2 messages before the end, she finally agreed to another counseling visit. But she told him she would be staying at another hotel and would only see him at the client's office. The message she sent yesterday said, "Meet me in Flagler at 10 o'clock. We have to finish everything today." I leaned back in my chair and wheezed a little before I started looking at the encrypted material. She was my whole life, and she'd betrayed me with that smarmy creep. But it was only once. She claimed she'd been forced, and clearly regretted it. Maybe I could get over it, maybe I could act like it never happened? I understand the circumstances. Looks like Reynolds somehow managed to get Janet's motor running. And I knew from long happy experience that she was completely irrational when it happened. In fact, I was sure Mr. Reynolds had had a pretty rough night. In public, Janet is poised and in control of herself. But in the bedroom, she turns into a fiery cauldron of pure lust. And if you manage to touch those passions, she will be relentless until she satisfies them. How Reynolds pissed her off remains to be seen. She knows she has hot blood. So there's no way she'd let a man get close enough to her to force his hand unless she physically ambushes him. That seems to be exactly what happened. I like to think I'm an adult. And I realize that there are dark moments in life when we do stupid and self-destructive things. The key is to avoid the long-term consequences of any regrettable actions. The sex was understandable if it actually happened as depicted in the letter. It was like a one-time situation, very close to rape. Her reaction was exactly what I expected her to react to. And it would have been easily forgivable if that had been the case. Logic told me there was no reason for her to lie, because it wouldn't occur to any of them that I would read the message. So I was confident that I could get past what she was originally forced to do. Even if she was a willing participant for most of the process. The problem was that if I didn't put a collar on her, I would never be able to trust her again. I reminded myself that she'd been on her best behavior for the past month. And if she could keep something like that from me once, she could do it again. So we had to talk about it. And she had to give me some satisfactory justification as to why she didn't share it with me. I could think of several good reasons, most notably that it would be embarrassing for her and hurtful for me. But I had to hear it from her. Meanwhile, I opened another folder. It was personal correspondence between Reynolds and a client. It was immediately clear that the client was a consortium of high-level drug traffickers with Hispanic roots who were interested in laundry services in the United States. There was nothing in the correspondence to tell me where the connection was made. But it was obvious that Reynolds was setting up shell companies through which the money passed. And he needed Janet's expertise to create a financial structure. In her defense, Janet also stated that she did not know the source of the money, only that there was a lot of it and it was foreign. It also explained why Reynolds used a big hammer to get her to work on the deal. One would assume that his clients would not be receptive if he suddenly had a staffing problem. In fact, bringing in another financial advisor in the middle of a transaction would undoubtedly be very dangerous to Mr. Reynolds' health. Now my brain was in mortal captivity. She cheated on me, and it killed me. But she only did it once, clearly regretted it and did everything she could to get out of the situation. That speaks in her favor. What about the flirting and teasing that preceded it? What does that mean? She's always flirting, even right in front of me. But it never leads to anything. It's just her nature. She's a gorgeous woman, and beautiful women are to be admired. Otherwise, there would be no fashion industry. Maybe she didn't realize that teasing needed to be done differently in this situation? Far worse was that she was creating financial conduits for some very bad men. But she didn't know that. Nevertheless, thanks to Reynolds, her involvement was in mortal danger. Guys like that didn't like loose ends. It was evening. But I had to call her. I wanted to warn her to get out of the situation immediately. I expected the call to go to voicemail, but instead a man answered. My heart sank. It had to be him. I suddenly pictured the phone lying next to their sweaty naked bodies in some hotel room in Miami. The voice said, "Hello, who is this?" I almost hung up, but instead I just stared at the phone. The voice said, "This is the FBI. I need you to identify yourself." I quickly cut the call short. I then activated the blue bug on her phone. I heard several male voices. The one holding the phone said, "Her husband just called." Another voice, clearly authoritative, said, "Then you need to call him back right now." And my phone rang. This time I answered. The voice said, "This is Special Agent Mark Schneider. I'm with the FBI. We need to talk to you about your wife. We'll be at your house in 3 hours, and I want you to be free to go." There was no welcome or, if it's convenient. Just, be there. He hung up. If my mind had been in turmoil before, now it was moving at breakneck speed. The FBI? What had Janet gotten herself into? Some people might get a little naughty. But I respond to stress by sleeping. I went to the bedroom, lay down on the bedspread, and lay there for 2 of the next 3 hours. I showered again to recover, tried to eat something. And I was more or less in working order when, in the evening, 3 very grim-looking guys knocked on my door. The 3 of them tried to look compassionate. But because they were fabs, they looked officious and bored rather than compassionate. I often run into FBI agents. And I always wondered if the poker in their ass was original equipment, or an aftermarket product. We went through the usual identification ritual, and all 3 of them sat down next to me. They had a protocol for that, and they followed it. Unfortunately, I had already read the book and knew why they were there. It was a visit for the survivors. The guy, who was obviously the head Phoebe, put a look of fake sympathy on his face and said, "I regret to inform you that your wife Janet died today. Please accept our condolences." I knew it was coming, but his words still blew up all my internal systems. Dead. She can't be dead. I must have sat there like a zombie, because finally the head fab said, "Mr. Widger?" I looked at him, and even he was shocked by the pain and devastation he saw. I said, "What? How?" He said, "She was caught up in a firefight between members of the Miami cartel. She was in the office of one of the cartel leaders when another group broke in and killed everyone there. 6 people were killed. One of them was your wife. We believe she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." I knew better. But I couldn't give the go-ahead without having my own personal experience with the Klingon interrogator. And yet my emotions were genuine as I burst into tears. Thieves looked stunned. Being manly men, they were not used to such feminine behavior. Between sobs, I asked, "What am I going to do now?" He said, "We'll work it out. We want to spare your feelings." That was very bad. Bad is not all. I started the day suspecting my wife of cheating, and by the end of it she was dead. So dead that the FBI wouldn't even let me see her. The shock just shut everything down. I felt a wave of nausea, and darkness descended on me. The next thing I remember was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a bunch of machines. There was a friendly nurse standing over me. She said, "Welcome back, Mr. Widger. You gave us quite a scare." I said, "Where am I? What happened?" She said, "Yesterday you had a minor incident with blood pressure. It was more of a psychology collapse than a physical one, but the FBI agents who brought you here thought it might be a heart attack. You have been under sedation for the last 24 hours. And then it hit me again, Janet. Dead." The device monitoring my heart went crazy. The nurse took a hypodermic injector, and I thankfully fell back to sleep. I was well enough to attend her funeral. It was a beautiful spring day. The casket was closed. I didn't like it, but I wasn't going to argue about the finer points of a funeral performance. Any spirit I had was long ago ripped out of me by cruel fate. I was an automaton. Her parents and our few friends were there. So were my parents. They were all sympathetic. We went back to my place in Georgetown for a gloomy dinner. Then they all left. And I was alone without her for the first time in 15 years. It was just awful. Underscore 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 underscore. It had been 6 long years, and my heartache was as overwhelming as the day it happened. I was unemotional most of the time, except for occasional bouts of uncontrollable crying. I didn't care about life. I lived all alone. No one noticed me. I missed Janet so much it hurt. At 44, I wasn't interested in replacing her. After experiencing intimacy with a woman like Janet, everything else pales in comparison. Buster and I lived a monastic lifestyle. When I adopted him, he was already fixed, and Janet's death had practically robbed me of my gelding. So celibacy was not a problem. I also had absolutely no social life. My friends gave up on me years ago. I didn't blame them. I was a melancholy piece of shit. I knew she had cheated. But that fact had minimal emotional impact compared to the crushing effect of her death. Any pain I might have felt from her infidelity compared to the indescribable impact of her subsequent death is like comparing the effects of a conventional bombing to having a 50-megaton nuclear device dropped on you. The concept is the same, but the scale is completely different. And the effect of the latter completely overrode any residual effects of the former. There was no doubt that we loved each other. And I already knew all the circumstances of what had happened. So I was sure that eventually we would find some way out. But her sudden and complete disappearance from my life is a different story. There's no escaping it. And it's impossible to recover from the death of someone you loved as much as I loved my wife. It was too hard. I could have spent the next 6 years wreaking havoc in the cybernetic universe, just to vent my rage and sense of cosmic injustice. But instead, I set my sights on becoming completely invisible. I didn't want to anger the deity who'd planted this on me. Being angry at the thought that someone up there is just waiting for the right time to drop the other shoe makes you very righteous. And it wears you down. Sure, working and entertaining made me quite wealthy. But it wasn't about the money. I was absolutely forced to work. I'm practically feral. I spent all my time on the road, just Buster and me restlessly traveling from one engagement to the next. My wandering life was a side effect of my mental state. I couldn't settle down. I knew that if I stopped working, I would realize how meaningless my whole life was. Thanks to the Black Hut community, there's always a demand for talented White Hut talent. So I spent a lot of time traveling around western cities like Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven, battered and just as disillusioned. I would have a firefight at noon and move on to the next fight. Living in a motel was a misery. In addition, there was always the problem of Buster, who could put any pet-friendly policy to the test. Most such establishments think of the customer who will have a placated Yorkie on their hands. Not a muscular beast that looks like a hellhound, constantly drooling and smelling. So I sold our old house in Georgetown and shelled out $350,000 for a new 43-foot Integra motor coach. After that, Buster and I went on tour. We traveled around the country depending on where the engagement took place. It was a nomadic existence. But it suited my detachment from the human race perfectly. I've never been involved in anything. It was for this reason that Buster and I parked in the Tombstone Territories RV park parking lot one February afternoon. It was ironic. Given what I do, I knew I'd end up in Tombstone sooner or later. The city of Sierra Vista is a charming place. It sits on the high plains of Arizona. But I wasn't a high plains drifter like Eastwood. I was there to conduct a covert infiltration of Fort Huachuca. It is the Army's main networking technology center, even if it is located in old Apache territory. Like Cochise, I was interested to see if I could destroy the place. Sierra Vista is home to about 45,000 people, which may seem small in this part of Arizona. But there are about 18,000 people on the base. So it feels like the Army owns the place. Since it was a covert case, I had a contact at the fort. He was bleary-eyed and bushy-tailed serpentine, and there was a West Point gleam in his eyes. I charge a client up to $250,000 for one such gig. However, they can be a little dangerous. I was about to commit a crime for which I could be shot and definitely put away for a long time. That is, if I didn't have an ironclad get-out-of-jail-free card from the Pentagon. Major Charlie Rafferty was that card. Of course, we had to hide our meeting. That Friday we gathered at a place called Linda's. Linda's is the archetypal honky-tonk that claims to employ the most beautiful bartenders in the Tombstone area. It serves a very decent draft 4 peaks, so both Rafferty and I had 20 ounces each while we familiarized ourselves with the basics. Essentially, I was left to my own devices in the infiltration. The purpose of the exercise was to count the coup in the network control room of the 9th Signal Center. It was an old Indian concept of warfare in which the point was to physically touch the enemy in battle rather than kill him. Still, if I had successfully scored a coup, the Army would be in deep shit. At least that was the plan. I didn't expect to be able to break through most of their standard defenses. I'd been doing infiltration exploits since I was 16. But as I delved into their core areas, I might run into something I couldn't get around. And Charlie was there to bail me out if I had a problem. I didn't tell him my plans, except for the introductory part. The reason was that I still had no idea what I was going to do. I must explore all the nooks and crannies to find the openings. We talked while Charlie ogled the bartenders. He was a lonely 32-year-old guy, and I didn't blame him. If I hadn't been completely emasculated by life, I would have been eyeing them too. They really were very attractive. Then a woman came through the door. She was with a flock of secretary birds from the base. I have no idea what attracted me to her. But it was like seeing an oasis of cool sparkling water in the middle of the Sahara Desert. I could almost hear the heavenly music. After 6 years of no feelings, I was bewitched. She had long blonde hair, huge blue eyes, and a deep golden Arizona tan. The tan contrasted beautifully with the elegant white silk blouse and businesslike pencil skirt. She looked a little older than the other women, but her body was excellent. I confess I am mesmerized by big beautiful boobs. Janet had an amazing rack. And frankly, it's something I absolutely must have if I ever want to kick the tires, so to speak. This new woman had exactly the same perfect breasts as Janet. Suddenly, after 6 years of doing nothing, I felt a thrill. Charlie noticed my look and said, "She's gorgeous, isn't she? But you can forget about her. This one's an ice queen. She makes the princess from Frozen look like a whore." She was harassed by whole infantry brigades. And she always replied, "Piss off." I tried her myself, and she acted like I wasn't even there. She never goes out. Either she has the world's most powerful vibrator or she's a lesbian. I stared at the woman. I watched the animation in good humor play across her very intelligent face as she interacted with her group. And the mice started sawing through my brainstem. I felt like I knew her. Of course, this was a base that specialized in what I was doing. And since she was clearly a general schedule employee, I might have run into her at some other time at some other facility. But the feeling never went away. Even more surprisingly, I was fascinated by her. Since Janet's death, I hadn't noticed any women, let alone wanted to talk to one. So my reaction was a fucking miracle, no pun intended. Did Janet have a long-lost sister or cousin? In fact, this new doppelganger reminded me so much of Janet that I had to leave as soon as possible. The deep sense of longing and regret was like slowly peeling a scab off a wound. I threw a couple 20s on the table and ran off. As I left, I told Charlie that next time he would only hear from me to claim that I owned their systems, or that he would recall the provost marshal. Anyway, I was going to be paid very well. One of the nice things about traveling from one place to another is that every city has something interesting to offer. In Sierra Vista's case, it was, just kidding, the annual Cochise Cowboy Poetry and Music Gathering. Such an event would be expected in Monterey, California, not a place less than 20 miles from the OK Corral. But it was. And it was really great. The next morning, which was Saturday, Buster and I went around to all sorts of places. We even attended a poetry reading. It was great. The locals avoided us. Buster has such a way with people. Even if he just walks beside me like a little lamb. That's when I saw her loitering outside the entrance to one of the downtown stores. Loca. El merchants must love the annual gathering of cowboy poetry and music in Cochise. She was alone, which was a crime against nature. A beauty like her should be accompanied by a man. Maybe she was a lesbian. She was wearing a modest pair of flared white shorts that showed off her beautifully muscled legs. Cork sandals with 3-inch heels only emphasized the fullness and roundness of her calves. And the yellow spaghetti top made her magnificent bust look like two huge graceful mountains with a deep valley between them. She radiated antisociality just like me. She seemed to be killing time by browsing the fair, which was actually what I was doing. I kept watching her, trying to remember where I'd seen her before. Inexplicably, I wanted to pat her on the shoulder and ask her a question. That reaction discouraged me. For 6 long years I had not felt the need to communicate with a woman. In fact, during that time I experienced no emotions other than loss and grief. This new sensation was completely unexpected and somewhat unsettling. Perhaps it was the fact that she reminded me so much of Janet. She had exactly the same general configuration, but all the details were different. She had a long sheaf of thick blonde hair. Janet's hair was blonde and cut in a bob style that said she was a student at Stanford University. This one was blue-eyed blonde with the same perfect facial features as Janet's. But Janet was Italian, and this one looked like a former California beach bunny. Finally, I approached her from behind. I just wanted to ask her politely where we'd met before. She turned around sharply with that infuriated look that women have when they think they're being stalked. So maybe I wasn't so secretive after all. I saw a flicker of "back off, asshole" in her eyes. Then they widened. She let out a little scream of terror. She covered her face with both hands and sped away. I've had women turn me down before. But never had a woman acted as if Satan himself had just materialized in front of her. It was completely disconcerting. I said, "Buster, stay here." He said in his low ringing voice, "Whatever you say, boss." And sat down. I rushed after the mystery woman. She ran toward the parking lot as if she were being chased by Cochise and his entire band of Apache defectors. She almost made it to her car. But remember, I'm a runner. She turned to face me, her breasts heaving with passion. And in that instant, I realized who she was. But my brain was telling my eyes that they were total crap. Was I having some kind of stroke? I thought ghosts only came out at night. She was breathing, practically gasping for breath. I hesitantly asked, "Janet? What do you say when the man you've mourned every minute of your life for the last 6 years suddenly shows up in a backwater cow town in Arizona?" She said with genuine fear in her voice, "Davy, you have to get out of here." I was still processing the input that my brain was telling me was wrong. So my speech was limited to one-syllable words. I asked, "Why?" She replied worriedly, "Because your life is in danger." My brain is still not back to normal. I asked again, "Why?" Janet replied, "Because I pissed off some very bad people. And if they think Janet Widger is still alive, they'll kill me and everyone associated with me. The only thing that protects you so far is that they believe I'm dead." Then her features changed, she covered her face with her hands and sobbed, "I did it to keep you alive, baby. You have to forget you ever saw me." Suddenly everything fell into place. Drug cartel, financial planning, FBI, and closed casket, everything. She served at WITSEC. Facing it in Sierra Vista may seem completely implausible. But it wasn't the 1 in 300 million chance it might have seemed. Fort Huachuca is a very small place. Neither she nor her handlers probably thought much of it. But she worked at the one place in the entire country where I was virtually guaranteed to show up. Perhaps on a subconscious level he was wishful thinking. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew for sure that I wouldn't lose her again in this life. I asked, "Is Marshall anywhere around right now?" Still sobbing, she replied, "No, it's been long enough that I just report to them every month." I said, "So no one in the immediate area knows we know each other?" She wiped her eyes and replied, snorting, "Probably not. I died long enough ago that they seem to have forgotten about me. But we can't mess around, or someone will eventually put two and two together." I said, "Look, I'd rather die than spend another second without you. There's got to be some way. Why don't we go somewhere and talk?" I could see an emotional war brewing inside her. It was obvious that she wanted this more than she wanted to stay alive. She looked around and asked, "Where are you staying? Maybe I can visit you there?" I'm an expert in covert operations, and one of the tenets of good craft is to make lies bold. And I said to her, "Look, I'm a widower, and you're a hot woman. So why don't you just go back to where you left so unceremoniously, and I'll pick you up like the lonely buckaroo that I am." It's not unusual for a guy like me to want to get involved in local action. She was looking at me with that look. It's the kind of look that never fails to melt the soles of my topside ears. I could see her calculating the odds in her mind. Then she smiled approvingly and said, "Great idea, cowboy. I'll see you in a couple minutes. But remember, you'll have to buy me breakfast." She turned and walked away, her tight white shorts showing off her gorgeous ass. I missed that intelligence. I missed her ass. Buster and I walked up to her 25 minutes later. I said, "Hi, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Davey Widger and this is my old buddy Buster. We're not from around here." She looked sentimental. I said, "What?" She said, "You've still got Buster." I asked, "Who are you more happy to see, him or me?" She replied, "Of course he is, silly." And she touched my hand lightly in that flirtatious way that all women use to show their interest. I also missed that fantastic sense of humor. To any observer, it looked like the guy and his dog were going to hook up. I said loud enough for the people around us to hear, "Then maybe I should buy you a drink. I have a place just north of Huachuca City." Stupid phrase, I know. But that's what it took to convince people that I was horny and she was the local sass. Then it dawned on me that her name wasn't Janet. I asked, "By the way, what's your name?" She replied, "Janie Winslow at your service, kind sir." Smart, keep the name close so you don't miss. All the way to my car we talked and she flirted. I haul car after van to serve as my local transportation. But that doesn't mean it has to be cheesy. My car is a Mini Coupe from John Cooper Works with 230 horses under the hood. It's a convertible. And we drove out of town. Buster sat majestically in the small back seat, his ears and tongue sticking out behind him in the stream like pennants on a clipper. It was a 15-minute drive at 100 miles per hour. There was nothing to talk about, because it was hard to hear my thoughts over the roar of the exhaust pipes and the wind noise. We parked, and Buster went about his business. We stood together at the door of the van and watched him. My heart was pounding frantically and my emotions were churning like the Atlantic in a hurricane. All I could hear was a little voice in my head screaming, "She's alive." But I asked as casually as possible, "So what do you do for a living, Janie?" It was just a way to keep the game going while I kept my cool. She said, "I am one of the lead auditors at the Base Logistics Command. I perform simple audit and control tasks as a GS-14. It was an extreme underutilization of talent, but it would allow her to stay in the public eye." Buster finally finished, and I slammed the door shut. Janet walked in, followed by Buster, who headed for his plate of food. I stepped behind her and closed the door. I turned and she rushed to me, sobbing like her heart was about to burst. She turned her face toward me, and we kissed in one of those hot, tongue-swapping kisses that only Janet is capable of. 6 long years flew by as if they had never happened. She let out loud voluptuous moans through our joined mouths. I picked her up in my arms, pressed my lips against hers, and walked the 30 feet across the interior of the car to the bedroom in the back of the cabin. I threw her on the bed. After we realized we absolutely needed each other, it was time to talk. She spent a lot of time in the bathroom. When she came out, I prepared 2 cups of chamomile tea for us. She sat down in the galley stall across from me. Needless to say, we had a lot to talk about. I said, "Before you say anything, I have to let you know what I know." She looked horrified. Like it was the last thing she expected me to say. But she understood what I meant. Shame and resentment flashed in her eyes. She was completely shocked. Then she focused. She said, "I probably don't need to ask how you know. But I still don't understand." I said, "I overheard something in Chicago that made me suspicious. So I opened a book that had Whitley Reynolds in it. I know you were fucking him, and I know about the money laundering. Your phone was tapped too, but when I used the bug, the only thing I found out was that you were dead." She looked sad and ashamed and said, "He fucked me the second time we were in Atlanta. It was business as usual. I had a little too much to drink, and up until that point he seemed like nothing more than a good friend. I trusted him." I said, "I know, I read all your letters." She blushed, then turned pale, but continued, "So you know he hooked me the same way he hooked you when we first met. At first I thought of him as a friend. I wouldn't mind being seduced. But it was nothing like that. W. As 2 co-workers who were socializing, perhaps a better term is flirting. I thought it was harmless. I thought I'd call it more of an emotional novel. But now the situation was completely different for both of us. We had lived 6 years apart, and during that time attitudes and relationships change a lot. Especially if you think the other person is dead. She said, "I didn't expect him to attack me. I wasn't so drunk that I didn't realize what I was doing. But my guard was down. It seemed natural for me to go back to his room to go over the plans for the next day. As soon as he closed the door, he was already on top of me. In the beginning it was forced sex. He pinned me against the wall, stuck out one breast and inserted his fingers into me seconds after he started kissing me. I struggled for maybe another 10 seconds. But when he started working his fingers down there, I was done. It seriously fueled my fire. And from that moment on, it was a conscious act. It went on for a while. And that night I basically gave him the fuck of his life. I didn't plan anything like that. Or would have done it voluntarily, at first, that is. Afterward, I was deeply remorseful and ashamed of myself. I realized what I had done. I am not that kind of person. I chose the wrong path. I have no excuses, and I am truly sorry." She stopped and looked at me sadly. She said, "The guilt is crushing me. It doesn't matter if you find out about it or not, I will always know about it. It completely shattered my self-image." And then, to compound my humiliation, he paraded me around like a trophy. I think with what I'd just done, I deserved it. The next day we had to work together as usual. There may have been a little ice, but we had to get the job done. Then I went out to dinner by myself when we were done with a client. I purposely chose a restaurant in another hotel because I thought he would never find me there. Of course, it wasn't easy. So he hunted until he found me. And then he sat down at the table like he owned me. He enjoys power and was testing me to see how I would react. I wanted to pour soup on his grinning head. But it was a very public place. So I decided to just sit there and check his bluff. You know me. Civilized to the extreme. That was a mistake, because a buddy soon showed up and the asshole immediately started bragging. I just sat there and simmered in silence. I planned to get even with him as soon as my friend left. At this point I interrupted and said, "I overheard a friend talking about you when I was in Chicago. He said you're totally in love with this guy and that you two fuck regularly." She wrinkled her nose and replied, "He only wished." What actually happened was this: he followed me into my room and tried to do the same thing. I even flirted with him a little to encourage him to do it. But this time I was locked up and waiting for him. When he started groping me, I reached down and squeezed his balls like I was making lemonade. His screams could be heard all over the hotel. I laughed at him, pushed him out into the hallway and locked the door. But the fact remained that I stayed with him until we finalized the engagement. I said, I know all that. Except for the part about the psychos. I saw you trying to disengage. It probably would have worked in your favor when we had the conversation we needed to have when you got back from Miami. She sighed with relief and said, so you obviously read what I sent him already after the fact. Did it sound like I was in love with him and was fucking him regularly? I nodded my head no with an ironic smile on my face. You also know that on my last visit I had planned to stay at another hotel to solidify my position toward him and me. I really thought you'd never know. And, of course, I didn't know you knew. I'm telling you the truth and I'm sure you believe it. I knew everything she was saying was true. I had read the trail of their message probably 1,000 times over the past 6 years. And every possible meaning I could put into it matched what she told me. But I had one more question. In fact, it was the only relevant one. Or would have been relevant if we'd been able to talk when she got back from Miami. I said, how could you treat me so cavalierly after what happened? There was not the slightest hint of guilt. That was my main problem. Since you're such a good actress, how can I trust you not to lie to me again? She frowned and said, one part of me wants to tell you to just pull yourself together. Obviously, I behaved toward you in the way I did, and it was very difficult to shield you from the consequences of my poor judgment. I knew you'd be hurt, no matter what the actual intent was. And that's why I shifted things around. It was easier for me to do it because I knew I would never let it happen again. She stopped and looked at me defiantly. She dared me to question her. She was able to put her feelings in a box as she wasn't going to let it happen again. It was Janet to a T. She may be small, but she may be as strong as adamantium. She can sell normal things for as long as it takes. I still wasn't sure how I felt about cheating. But that wasn't a problem after what followed. She read my thoughts. Her gaze softened, and she took one of my hands in both of hers. She looked intently into my eyes and added, all that aside, the part of me that loves you to bits and always has, just wants to tell you that I will never betray you again and that I will spend every day for the rest of my life assuring you of my loyalty. And there will never be a need to lie to you like that again. That night I learned a lesson I'll never forget. And it came in handy for the next 6 years. I know I've suffered from overconfidence when it comes to men. But now, once burned, twice wary. For the last 6 years, I've turned down every potential suitor because I felt I owed you. Even though I knew you thought I was dead and that I would never see you again. I know it sounds crazy, but it was part of my personal penance. And if you don't believe me, check it out at the base. Thanks to Major Rafferty, I didn't have to do that. She leaned back in her chair, looked at me with a wry smile and said, take your pick. Which answer do you like? I smiled back at her and said, I'll go to door number 2. What's more, that other woman was one Janet Widger. She died 5 years ago, and I barely had time to get to know Janie Winslow. 6 years is a long time. And I think Janie Winslow has learned a few things in that time. I know you're not the same person. She gave me a hot look. And she rubbed her bare foot against my leg, promising companionship. She said quite sincerely, I know what it's like to lose the one thing in my life that's important to me, and it will never happen again. I had already guessed the general circumstances of her untimely death. But I needed details to quiet the pain of the last 6 years. So I asked, what happened in Miami? She says, 2 FBI agents met me at the gate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. They forced me into a car. Apparently they were following the guys we were going to meet. We drove around for a while and I was transferred to a van that had a lot of surveillance equipment in it. The special agent was inside. He told me they knew about everything I was doing. I told them I wouldn't be doing anything other than what I was contractually obligated to do, which was to create a financial structure for several new corporations. I added that I had only recently received evidence that I was dealing with organized crime. I think I hinted that I knew there was a problem the day before I left. At any rate, I told them they could have my evidence. They told me that, as far as I was concerned, the only way to prove their non-involvement was to put a wire on the meeting. They put me in front of a choice. So I said yes. Unfortunately, the cartel installed a frequency scanner. It picked me up almost as soon as the meeting began. As my cover was blown, the FBI broke into the house and a shootout ensued. I was shot in the forearm and hand. Wood was completely killed, and all 4 cartel members at the meeting were also killed. The FBI people visited me in the hospital and told me about my options. I could go to jail because what I was doing was illegal, even if I didn't know it. Or I could testify and get into witness protection. They said either way you have to think I'm dead to stay off the cartel's radar. And that they've already taken that step by letting you know I'm dead. That revelation almost killed me. One day you get on an airplane and you're flying out of your happy life into a nightmare. I was nowhere near ready to deal with that. I cried for hours while they worked with me. She said, thanks to my grand jury testimony, a major drug syndicate has been brought down and many Colombians are behind bars. The hose men were so enraged that they would have killed both you and me in highly inventive ways. If I hadn't been killed in the raid. And if the cartel ever suspected you were still my husband, they'd make an object lesson out of you to get the word out to everyone else who cooperates. That's why I had to die very publicly. That's why all the newspapers wrote about it. The FBI, understandably, could not have organized your death elsewhere so as not to arouse suspicion. It would have been too coincidental a coincidence. I was actually lucky to be badly wounded. It provided convincing cover. She flipped her right arm over silently, revealing several large scars on her forearm and another on the back of her hand. Goosebumps ran down my spine at the thought of her precious flesh being ripped apart by bullets. With tears in her eyes, she added, I was there in the background at my own funeral. Your grief almost killed me. At first, they transferred me to Albuquerque. But I had to get a job. They had an opening here in Huachuca. Given my experience and abilities, the marshals sent me here. I spent 6 years in a world that didn't have you in it. And it was the worst 6 years of my life. I don't date. I only socialize with other women. And I only do it so I don't stand out. I changed my appearance to throw off the trail of anyone who might be looking for me. It's much easier for a woman to do it than a man. Just grow your hair and change its color. With a tan and blue eyes, I now look more English than Italian. Then she stopped, looked at me coquettishly, and asked, do you like the new me? This may be the dumbest question in the world. I looked at that beloved face and said, I love the old you, and now I adore the new you. Your return to my life is a miracle, and I will never let you out of it again. She sighed and said, but you must. The same conditions still apply. I can't have anything to do with you without jeopardizing my cover in both our lives. I said, leave it to me. Simple question, do you want to be my wife again? She studied my face. Janet is a strong and intelligent woman. And she's not stupid. The intensity of her gaze was frightening. She said, I betrayed you with another man and then hurt you with my death. Why do you want to be with me? I said simply, I love you. I've always loved you. From the moment we met, you have been the other half of me. You fill in all the gaps and make me whole. And you've given me all the devotion a man could ever ask of a woman. Our marriage was the happiest time of my life. It's so simple. The thing is, even though I had already read and understood the context of you fucking a guy and saw your response, I may have had a hard time accepting it at the time. But now it's a moot point, because I had to live without you for 6 years, thinking you were gone forever. The woman who I believed betrayed me has been lying in a sealed coffin for over 6 years now. Therefore, there is a huge partition in my psyche between what you did then and the person who sits across from me now. In essence, you are a completely new woman to me. I just met Janie Winslow. I know she's not the Janet Widger I used to know. She looks different. And she's had a different life experience up to this point, which undoubtedly shaped her current attitude toward her choices and responsibilities. You can learn a lot about yourself and life in general if you carry a whole 6 years of grief inside you. We both went through the trial by fire. So in my imagination I'm dealing with a new woman who happens to resemble my late wife. And I want her to be mine forever. This attitude may have been formed by your sudden resurrection, but too much water has flowed over the dam to treat any past indiscretions differently. I know why you're at wit's end. I realize you had no choice. I know you well enough to realize that you wouldn't have done this to us if you had other options. Accordingly, everything I experienced was just collateral damage. I'm a tough enough guy to just accept it and move on. Like I said, I'm mourning my dead wife. And I want this new woman I've just met to replace her for me. You're okay with this? It means we'll start our marriage with a clean slate. She looked at me with the most amazingly touching expression on her face. It was pure joy and relief. She replied, from the bottom of my heart. Underscore 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 underscore. 2 days later, I called my contact Charlie at the Netcom/9th Army Signal Command Operations Center. This led to a frantic 3 weeks of debriefing while I explained to them where all the holes were. Then they wrote me a big check and I went to the Department of Motor Vehicles on Charleston Road and picked up my new driver's license. I went to the rented mailbox on base to get our new passport, credit cards, and social security papers. Sarah and Buster were waiting for me when I got back to the van. Over the past 3 weeks, Janie Winslow abruptly terminated her military service and disappeared to an unknown destination. There is a record that she may have moved to Maine, but no forwarding address. Records of her participation in the WITSEC program have completely disappeared, as if it never happened. And its manager, Marshall, was reassigned. Janie Winslow was now as much a ghost as Janet Widger. This was one of my easiest exploits. The Department of Justice has an almost undetectable command injection flaw in its staffing portal code. Maybe someday I'll have my company tell them where it is. It took a while to find the right set of identifiers. But once I found two that fit, stealing them was a matter of seconds. William Weston was aboard Air France Flight 447 when it went down in the middle of the Atlantic. He was 37 years old at the time. His 38-year-old widow, Sarah Weston, was killed in a car accident in Cleveland later that year. I have to admit, it took a little while to make Janie disappear from all government records. But it was easy to knock me down. There was only one person I trusted. But my little brother was always someone I could rely on. And, of course, the company my brother was forced to take over after my sad demise was still profitable. So he had a big financial interest in me dying. Accordingly, one death notice and a secret conduit to an account in the Cayman Islands, and so Bill Weston, his wife Sarah and their dog saddled up their luxury RV and headed down a dusty trail outside of the Tombstone territory. Not coincidentally, the theme from the Magnificent Seven was playing in the background as they drove off into the sunset. Epilogue. We were sitting under the awning on the deck of our Hylas 70 yacht at the Porto di Bacali Marina dock. It was one of those classic late summer days in Campania. The sun was blazing and the sea breeze was refreshing. We were in Naples because we had a tour of Falerno wineries, and we tried a bottle of Falerno del Masico, whose lineage goes back to the famous Falerno wines of ancient Rome. It's been almost a decade and we've stopped looking over our shoulder. I set up trippers in various government and commercial systems that were supposed to alert me if someone was investigating Bill or Sarah Weston. But so far, there hasn't been a peep. And if there is, I've got a million rabbit holes we can disappear down. We live in Cortona, and yes, I know it's a cliché thanks to Francis Mays. My brother has grown the company to the point where I don't worry about money. And the Italian hill town is the last place you'd expect to see the late Dave and Janet Widger. We have a large yacht that I have moored in Civitavecchia and we spend most of our time visiting every interesting or historic place in the Mediterranean we can think of. And every day of our life together gets better and better. At 54, Janet is as beautiful at 54 as she was at 23. And she still turns the heads of every man in the room. After all, this is Italy, and Italian men appreciate hot women of all ages. But I was never attracted to her magnificent body. I was attracted to her powerful intellect and self-esteem. And they only get stronger with age. Although still flirtatious, she has evolved into a person who has a good grasp of what it means to be human. In 16 years, you grow up a lot. And if 6 of those years are spent thinking that the other person is forever lost to you, your marriage and life prospects will turn into something approaching wisdom. I never doubted her love for me. And now I don't doubt the decisions she makes. You always know in your heart when you are right or wrong. Sometimes it takes strength to act on that knowledge. And Janet is strong enough to do that. There will never be a problem. And as for me? Well, maybe I finally figured out the plan. Shit happens. And when it happens, you either start shoveling, or it buries you. Carpe diem is not just a local saying. It's a way of taking fate into your own hands. Remember that the next time you overhear someone talking in a bar,